Good morning. Welcome again to another Sunday with us at City Awakening. Whether it's your first time or just one of many times that you've been with us, we're glad to see you this morning. We'd love to engage with you during the service. So get in there on the chat. You can submit some prayer requests. Just check out what's going on with us. We're just really glad that you're tuning in with us, especially this Sunday as it's Mother's Day. So want you to be aware. Stay tuned throughout the service. We've got a couple surprises coming up for all the mothers out there. So we're looking forward to the service. Let's get started.
In the darkness, we were waiting without hope, without light, till from heaven you came running. There was mercy in your eyes to fulfill the law and prophets. To a virgin came the word from a throne of endless glory to a cradle in the dirt. Praise the Father, praise the Son, praise the Spirit, three in one, God of glory, majesty, praise forever to the King of Kings. To reveal the kingdom coming and to reconcile the lost, to redeem the whole creation. You did not despise the cross, for even in your suffering you saw to the other side, knowing this was our salvation. Jesus, for our sake you died. Praise the Father, praise the Son, praise the Spirit, three in one, God of glory, majesty, praise forever to the King of Kings. In the morning that you rose, all of heaven held its breath, till that stone was moved for good, for the Lamb had conquered death. And the dead rose from their tombs, and the angels stood in awe, for the souls of all who'd come to the Father are restored. And the church of Christ was born. Then the Spirit lit the flame. Now this gospel truth of old shall not kneel, shall not faint. By His blood and in His name, in His freedom I am free. For the love of Jesus Christ, who has resurrected me. Praise the Father, praise the Son, praise the Spirit, three in one, God of glory, majesty, praise forever to the King of Kings. Praise the Father, praise the Son, praise the Spirit, three in one, God of glory, majesty, praise forever to the King of Kings. Praise forever to the King of Kings.
We have a special song for our mothers this morning. It's called The Prayer. We hope you enjoy.
I pray you'll be our eyes and watch us where we go, and help us to be wise in times when we don't know. Let this be our prayer when we lose our way. Lead us to a place, guide us with your grace, to a place where we'll be safe.
I pray we'll find your light
Pray we'll find your light
and hold it in our
and
heart.
hold it in our heart.
When stars go out each night,
Stars go out each night.
remind us where you are.
Remind us where you are.
Let this be our
Let this be our prayer.
when shadows fill our
When
day.
shadows fill our day.
Lead us to a place,
Guide us with your grace to a place where we'll be safe.
a world where pain and sorrow will be ended, and every heart that's broken will be mended, and we'll remember we are all God's children, reaching out to touch you, reaching to the sky. We ask that life be kind
We ask that life be kind
and watch us from
and
above.
watch us from above.
We hope each soul will find
We hope each soul will find
another soul to
another soul to
love.
love.
Let this be our
Let this be our prayer.
just like every child.
Just like every child.
Lead us to a place, guide us with your grace, give us faith so we'll be safe. Lead us to a place, guide us with your grace. Give us faith so we'll be saved.
Happy Mother's Day to the best mom in the world. We all love you very much.
They have to do a bunch of stuff for us.
Is make sure the house runs smoothly. Taking care of the kids, because that's really hard for my mom doing here.
Managing time, like being able to, do your life and manage all that, but then having to deal with your kids and just, it's a whole nother person. It's a lot of responsibility and it's 24/7.
Probably having to homeschool Muslim kids.
Taking care of all the kids and seeing what they need, or you would have to make dinner every night and clean up after us and everything like that. So
Taking care of everybody, and I love you, Mommy.
Probably taking care of their children and making sure they have a really good life.
Changing diapers every hour and waking up every midnight to feed a baby or when I have to listen to a baby cry.
It's all the pressure that's put upon you. It's just a lot. Thanks, Mom. I love you.
Taking care of my father. They serve us. They keep everything moving. And they love us.
You do homeschool and you don't have mom. It's gonna be kind of hard doing it with your dads, and the dishes won't always be clean and there'll be no laundry.
Because they not only teach us and guide us through life, but they show us unconditional love and support, and I know I wouldn't be the person I am today without my moms.
Moms are important because then we wouldn't be born.
They help you be the better you, and they push you to be the best you can be.
They take care of us. They feed us. They basically do a lot.
I wouldn't be where I am without her.
I love my mom because she's a hard worker for me.
Because they help their children survive for the next day.
She's great and she helps me with everything. What I like about my mom is I like that she reads aloud to us and lets me help her cook dinner.
You're there for me all the time, 110%.
I love my mom because she cares for me and she teaches me to be a better Christian.
My mom is kind, loving, and she helps me out a lot.
No matter what she's going through or how busy she is or what she has to do, if I call her or text her and say that I need help or I'm going through something, she will drop everything to help me because that's how selfless she is.
That she makes us breakfast and does all the hard work for us. She's super nice and gets us stuff that we want sometimes.
She's nice, kind, generous, beautiful. She always shares her thoughts. And she's a great mom. Mom is really nice.
She's very supportive, she has a generous heart, and she has a great sense of humor.
Because she cares for me, and she strives for me to be the best that I can be from a Christian perspective.
She always puts others' needs above her own, and I hope to be a mother like her one day. So I love you, Mom, and happy Mother's Day to everyone.
Hey everybody, my name is Lewis. I'm lead teaching pastor here at City Awakening. Great to be with you through our online worshiping community. Happy Mother's Day to all of you. I hope you enjoyed the video that we just shared with you. I hope it brought a smile to your face, especially those of you who are moms and even those of you who are spiritual moms. By spiritual mom, I mean those of you who may not have children, but yet you invest your lives into other people's children, even children that exist in this church. We're so thankful for all of you moms and all the sacrifices that you do on a daily basis, including all the adjustments you had to make with social distancing that's taken place, homeschooling and all of that, and so much more. We're just so thankful for all of you, and we know that this Mother's Day might be a unique Mother's Day, but we hope it's a special one for you. In fact, we have a gift for you, for those of your moms and spiritual moms. We want to bless you with a gift, just our way of celebrating you and honoring you on this Mother's Day. And so be sure to stick around for the end of the message, towards the end when we give you some next steps and stuff. We'll let you know how to receive that gift, but it's just our way to celebrate and honor you. So happy Mother's Day, moms. We love you a lot. Thank you for your sacrifices. As for today we are continuing our teaching series that we've been doing called Starting Point, and it's all about reasons for faith, not skepticism. And so far in this series, we've talked about reasons for faith in the existence of God, reasons for faith in trusting that the Bible's true. And last week, we started part 1 of a 4-part overview of the biblical narrative of the Bible's story. And in part 1, we talked talked about creation and the fall of humanity. Well, today we're going to talk about part 2, which is the law. And when I talk about law, what I mean is I'm talking about God's law, the laws of God. For those of you who are moms, dads, teachers, you're very familiar with the importance of teaching children about rules, boundaries, laws, and even teaching them about consequences that come when you break those laws and those rules. Well, God operates with us in a similar way. God gives us certain laws, certain rules and boundaries that he wants us to follow, and then there's consequences when we break those different laws that he's given us. And so what we're going to talk about today is we're actually going to address two things, two major questions that people have. We're going to address, what is the importance of God's laws? All right, why is God's laws important? Like, what does it mean? What's the importance of God's laws? The second thing that we're going to address, because it usually leads into this, when we talk about God's law, it leads into this second question. Why would a loving God allow a consequence like hell to exist? Why would another way that people would say is, why would a loving God allow people to go to hell or send people to hell? Why is that even a consequence for us? All right, so these are the things that we're going to address today. If you have your Bibles, go ahead and turn them over to Exodus chapter 20. We'll be in Exodus chapter 20, verses 1 to 17. It's in the front quarter part of your Bible. And the title of today's message is The Story Part 2, all right, the law and reason for hell. All right, here's the big idea of the message. God's laws aren't a requirement for a relationship with God. They're not a condition for a relationship with God. Instead, they are a loving response to a relationship that God's inviting us into. All right, I'll say that again. All right, God's laws are not a condition for a relationship. They are a loving response to a relationship that God is inviting us into. All right, let me give you a little bit of context here. In Genesis chapter 1 and 2, we learn that God created the entire universe and everything in it. And after creating humanity, creating Adam and Eve, God said it's very good. He didn't just say it was good, he said it's very good. But in Genesis chapter 3, Adam and Eve sinned against God, and that's when sin and suffering entered into our world. That's when things went from being very good to being very bad. Now, God eventually restores them from sin, and by the time we enter into Exodus 20, the earth is largely populated. And but human sin and corruption continues, so God rescues the Jews from Egyptian slavery and uses them as a unique nation to bring further restoration into our world. We're about to study the part of biblical history where God gives them some laws. He gives them the 10 Commandments. And so let's check it out. Let's go ahead and see what it says in Exodus 20, verses 1 to 17. Here's what it says. And God spoke all these words, saying, I am the Lord, your God. He says, I am the Lord, your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt and out of the house of slavery. Notice that God doesn't start with the rules. He doesn't start with the rules, doesn't start with the law. He starts with a relationship. He starts with a relationship, not with the rules. God says, I am the Lord, your God. That's personal. Right from the beginning, God is establishing his covenant commitment, his covenant relationship with them. He's saying, I am the Lord, your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt. Right? That's even more personal. It's a picture of God being like a loving parent who comes in and rescues their child, scoops their child up into their arms to rescue them from danger. In this case, it's the danger of Egyptian oppression and Egyptian slavery. And so right in the beginning, here's what God's saying. God is basically saying that he's offering them a relationship and salvation before he's ever even giving them some rules to follow. All right. Now, this is a completely different teaching than every other religion that exists in the world. All right, not some religions, but every religion that exists in the world teaches some form of this. It's you have to obey God's rules, obey the rules of your religion, the laws of your religion, and then you receive your relational reward. It starts with obedience first, and then you get your relationship, then you get your rewards and your blessings. There's even a form of this in a kind of secular worldview, in non-religious worldviews, where people kind of have this Western view of karma in their minds. It's the mindset of, if I do good things, and I'm a good person, then good will come back to me. It's basically saying if I do this good thing, then I will get my reward in return. Christianity is the only faith in the world that teaches, no, it is about God giving you a relationship first, inviting you into a relationship with him, saving you first, giving you a salvation reward in him, first and foremost, before he ever asks you to even do anything, to have any kind of rules. It starts with a relationship first and foremost. And this should change our view, shift how we view God's laws. Whenever we look at God's laws, we should look at God's laws not as a condition for a relationship, because God's already giving that relationship here. He's inviting them into that. We shouldn't look at it as a condition for a relationship. Instead, it is a loving response that God is giving to those he's in a relationship with. We should view God's laws not as a hindrance to relational joy, but instead as a benefit to relational joy. It's just like a traffic light, basically, or a stoplight will show us that we cherish life and we want to protect life. Well, God's laws show us what he cherishes, shows us what he wants to protect in our lives as well. And so I want you to view God's laws through that lens, through that perspective when we get into the 10 Commandments now. All right, first starts with a relationship with God. All right, so we need to view it with that. It's not a condition for a relationship. It's not a hindrance to relational joy. Instead, it is a benefit to our relational joy. God is putting these things in place because he loves us, he cares for us, and he wants to take us deeper into joy in our relationship with him and our relationship with others. Here's the 10 Commandments. Listen to this. Commandment number 1 is in verse 3. You shall have no other gods before me. God's heart is for us to put our relationship with him first, to put him above all other things, put him first in our lives. Commandment number 2 is in verse 2, or in verse 4. You shall not make yourself a carved image. We're to worship God, not our idols, not money, people, fame, or anything else but God. It's also about worshiping God rightly, meaning we are to worship God for who God actually is, not who we want God to be or who we've made God up to be in our minds. Commandment number 3 is in verse 7. You shall not take the name of the Lord in vain. We're to honor God's name. We're to revere God's name, have reverence for God's name. Commandment number 4, verse 8. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. We're to take a day off each week to rest, have some fun, celebrate God, and enjoy the many gifts that he has given us to enjoy in life. Commandment number 5 is verse 12. Honor your father and honor your mother. All right, we're to honor our mothers and our fathers, love and care for our families, even be respectful to the human authorities that exist in our lives. Commandment number 6 is in verse 13. It says, you shall not murder. All right, this is about us protecting and valuing the sanctity of innocent human life, regardless of age, race, or gender. Commandment number 7, verse 18, is in verse 14. You shall not commit adultery. We're to value God's sexual ethics and the centrality of marriage. Jesus even said that this includes emotional adultery, meaning that lusting with your eyes or even lusting with your heart. Some people, they may not have a physical adultery, but they're having an emotional adultery in their hearts. Right? Commandment number 8 is in verse 15. You shall not steal. We shouldn't steal others' property, cheat people in business, fudge our tax numbers, take credit for things that somebody else has done, taking credit for things that we haven't done. Commandment number 9, verse 16, you shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. We're to place a high value on being truthful in every relationship we have. This includes in our marriages, in our families, our friendships, our business relationships, even with the strangers that we interact with on the streets. Commandment number 10, last one, verse 17. You shall not covet your neighbor's house. We should be content with God's provision for our lives, being thankful for what we do have instead of always complaining about what we don't have. This includes being content with our looks, our talents, our success in life and ministry, instead of coveting the blessing and work God's doing in somebody else's life or even in somebody else's ministry. See, what I want you to notice in this part of the text is that these are all about relationship. If you go back and you study all these laws, and you'll see that every single one of these laws is about a relationship. It's about our relationship with God and our relationship with each other. It starts first with a vertical relationship with God, and then that affects our horizontal relationships with other people. See, what God's doing here is he's setting us apart as a unique people, as a radically different people, to live radically different lives in our city, where we are loving God and loving others as he has loved us. Now, are we going to stumble at that? We're going to mess up in that sometimes and break some of these laws? Yes, we will. Which is exactly why we need to remember that God started things out with a relationship first. God extended his love before he gave us his laws. All right? He gave us his love before he gave us his laws or even required us to do anything. All right, now, this is not an excuse. God's love for us is not an excuse for disobedience. All right, we got to be careful of that because some people are like, well, since he loves us, well, then why does it matter if we obey? No. God's love for us isn't an excuse for disobedience. Instead, it should be a motivator for us to actually want obedience, to want to obey God's laws. It's because we know God loves us. We know if he's extending a relational hand to us in our disobedience, then it means he loves us and he cares for us, and we know his laws are good for us. The things that he wants of us, man, they're good for us, and they're there to protect us and to take us deeper into relational joy with him and with other people in our world and in our society. And so we want to trust God's laws and view his laws not as a hindrance to relational joy, but as a benefit to relational joy. And so therefore, we want to obey God's laws because we know he loves us. It started with a relationship first, and then he gave us the laws. And so what I want to do is I want to basically address, kind of like I said before, two categories, several different questions when it comes to these two categories on discussions of law. Whenever we talk about law, these are the things that come up. Well, what's the importance of God's law? Okay, so we need to discuss that. And then why would a loving God, such a loving relational God, allow a consequence like hell to exist or allow people to go send people to hell? All right, those are the questions. We're going to kind of break these down. We're going to address several questions when it comes to the law and even questions about hell. And here's the first one. What's the purpose of God's law? All right, what's the purpose of God's law? We already discussed this, right? First, to reveal God's heart. It's to reveal God's heart. Second, it's to protect our relational joy. Third, it's to create radically different people in our cities. And then fourth, it is to point out our need for God's grace in every relationship we have. We can't live out the laws of God in our relationships without the grace and the help of God in our lives. All right, number two, why do Christians obey some biblical laws but then dismiss others? This is a question that I get from a lot of skeptics. They'll say, man, you Christians are just a bunch of hypocrites. And y'all kind of pick and choose which laws you want to keep and which laws you don't, which laws you want to follow, which ones not. Why is it okay for you to follow the biblical laws on sexual ethics? You want that to be upheld, but then you don't want to follow biblical laws on dietary ethics, eating your chorizo and your bacon. Why is that okay? And it's a fair question. But it also has an incorrect view and an incorrect understanding of God's biblical laws. See, biblical laws have three primary categories in the Bible, right? There's three primary categories of biblical law. It's civil law, ceremonial law, and moral law. All right, those three things. There's civil law in the Bible, there is ceremonial law, and then there's what's called moral law. All right, the civil laws of God are basically the laws that the Jews would use in order to govern themselves as a nation. And we don't have to obey those civil laws anymore because Jesus and his disciples said that we should obey the laws of the land that we're in. Jesus and his disciples, they knew that Christianity was going to spread, that it was going to spread both locally and globally. And so they said we should, it doesn't make sense for us to have to follow Jewish civil laws while living in America. All right, so this is laws we don't have to follow. We're to obey the laws of the land, just like Jesus and his followers said. All right, now the ceremonial laws, those are laws that they would follow in order to be able to worship God. They were connect with God more deeply. They were laws that they followed in ceremonial worship with God. Now we don't have to follow those laws anymore either because Jesus came and fulfilled all the ceremonial rituals that were required for us to worship God so that we can actually go directly to God ourselves, worship Jesus ourselves. We don't have to have all these ceremonies. We can just go and worship God freely because of who Jesus is and what he came to do. He perfectly fulfilled the law for us, allowing us direct access to God. Now, the moral laws of God, Those are basically laws that deal with different issues of like immorality or morality, things like lying, stealing, cheating, murder, basically laws that would fall under the Ten Commandments. All right? Here's why we follow those laws. Here's why we uphold the moral laws of God. It's because God's moral character doesn't change. We uphold the moral laws of God because God's moral character doesn't change. And so Christians aren't picking and choosing which laws to, uphold and not uphold, out of hypocrisy or convenience. We shouldn't be doing that, right? Instead, it's a matter of a difference between civil, ceremonial, and moral laws. And we uphold the moral laws of God because God's moral character doesn't change. Question number 3, what did Jesus say about God's laws in hell? All right, what did Jesus say about God's laws in hell? In Matthew 5, verse 17, Jesus said, "Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them." All right, Jesus came to fulfill the laws of God on our behalf. He came to live the perfect life that we have not lived. And then he died the death that we deserve to die for our sins. He suffered hell on the cross so that we didn't have to suffer hell in eternity. All right, and when Jesus talks about hell, in fact, Jesus talked more about hell than anybody else in the Bible. Right? Think about that. Right? I'm not going to get into the details of everything that Jesus said about hell. That's something that you could study on your own. What I want you to know is that Jesus talked more about hell than more than anybody else in the Bible. And if you're not a Christian, that should cause you to pause and think for a minute. It should cause you to pause and think, because listen, if you are willing to trust Jesus, you trust Jesus in so many other of his teachings, you agree with him in other teachings that he has, like, love your neighbor as yourself, or he who has not sinned cast the first stone, or don't judge, right? I mean, it's one of your favorites. You quote it a lot. People quote that one a lot. Don't judge or you shall be judged first. If you are willing to trust Jesus and agree with Jesus on those teachings, then maybe you should consider trusting him on his teachings of hell and his warnings against hell. Otherwise, why would he have spent so much time talking about it? He talked more about hell than anybody else in the Bible, which tells you it's something that's important to him and he wants you to hear and to learn about. You trust him in so many other of his teachings. Maybe consider trusting him on his teachings and warnings regarding hell too. Number 4, how could a loving God send somebody to hell? Now, how could a loving God send somebody to hell? This is a question that so many people tend to wrestle with, including those who are Christians. And it's like, if God is so loving, then why does he send people to hell? Why doesn't he just forgive everybody and let everybody go to heaven? But to say that is actually, we're trying to basically, make God more loving. And in our attempt to make God more loving, we're actually making God less loving by saying that. We're making God less loving because a God who simply overlooks injustices in the world isn't loving at all. I mean, do you really want to believe in a God who overlooks injustices like Hitler, ISIS, the Pulse shootings, or the Sandy Hook shooter who shot up all the kids in Connecticut? And do you really want to believe in a God like that? Do you really want God to overlook injustices in the world, simply turn a blind eye? I mean, wouldn't it be unloving for God to simply turn a blind eye to the injustices like that exist in this world? If you don't want, you wouldn't want our local governing authorities to govern the world like that. And so why do you want God to govern the world like that? Look, if you agree that, you say, I believe that we shouldn't overlook injustices like that in this world. Well, guess what? God doesn't either. He doesn't want to overlook those things either. Well, we believe that, prisons should exist, jails should exist, and that a criminal should be convicted of their crime, and then if they're convicted, go to jail, go to prison. Well, guess what? God believes in that too. See, hell is God not overlooking our sin. It's God's justice on our world. Now, we need to be careful here in the sense of, too, like a lot of times what we'll do is we'll compare ourselves. We just talked about some major issues that we've seen in the world, major injustices, Hitler, ISIS, things like that. And so we need to be careful, though, not to compare ourselves with people like that and, with Hitler and say to ourselves, well, you know what, I'm not as bad as him. I'm not, because if we compare ourselves with people like that, we always make ourselves better than what we are. We think that we're better than we actually are. So instead of comparing ourselves with people like Hitler saying, well, I'm not as bad as him, therefore I deserve heaven, instead what we should say is, well, you know what? I'm not as good as God. We should compare ourselves to God and say, I'm not as good as God. Therefore, even my own sin makes me undeserving of heaven, makes me undeserving of God's presence. Question number 5, which comes from number 4. Number 5 is, isn't hell excessive for the crime? I mean, isn't hell excessive for the crime? I mean, if we sin, we got to suffer in hell and eternity for that. In hell, I mean, it doesn't seem fair. It doesn't seem like the punishment actually fits the crime. But it does fit the crime if we think about the magnitude of who it is that we're committing the crimes against, that we're sinning against. For example, if you're not going to go to jail for lying to a friend, but you'll go to jail for lying to a judge in court. In fact, you could face up to 5 years imprisonment for lying to a judge in court. Now, the sin is the same. Both are lying. But who they're sinning against, who you're sinning against, is the difference between the extent of the punishment. Well, in a similar way, God is an infinitely much greater judge than any judge in our world, any judge in the court system. And so sinning against him, lying against him, any kind of sin against him deserves a much greater punishment than 5 years in imprisonment. See, the reason that we believe that the punishment doesn't fit the crime, the reason that we believe the punishment of hell is too big is because we believe that our God is too small. We don't have a big enough view of God. If we truly believed and understood the magnitude of how immensely and infinitely holy God is, how perfect he is, how righteous he is, how majestic he is, if we truly understood the magnitude, how infinitely holy he is, then we would be less surprised that there's a hell and more surprised that he would actually be willing to save anybody from hell. Because the truth is he really shouldn't save anybody, not compared to his infinite holiness. Number 6, why would God create people he knew would go to hell? Why would he create people he knew would go to hell? This is one that I wrestled with for many years, and there's something that I found that was really helpful to me in this, and so I'll share it to you. Maybe it's helpful for you as well, and it's something called the doctrine of concurrence. All right, the doctrine of concurrence. The doctrine of concurrence is basically where we believe that God is sovereign over the entire world. He's sovereign over his creation, while at the same time allowing humanity to have free will in the creation, in the world. It's the belief that both God and humanity are actively working in the world in ways that will accomplish God's plans, while at the same time allowing humanity to have free will in the world. And so if you want to say that, God should have created the world without people going to hell, God should have created a world then what you're asking God to do is to create a world where free will doesn't exist. You're asking God to take away all free will. What you're doing is you're basically asking God to create us like the very computer, TV, or the iPhone or phone that you are watching this message from. But God doesn't want a programmed relationship with us. He wants to have a genuine relationship with us. And for God to have a genuine relationship with us, he had to create free will. And because there is free will, it means that God doesn't send anybody to hell. God doesn't send anybody to hell. We send ourselves there. We send ourselves there when we choose to reject God's invitation for a relationship with him. We choose to send ourselves there when we choose hell without God instead of heaven with God. And this grieves God's heart. I want you to hear that, and I want you to know that today, okay, that grieves God's heart. See, just like God's laws reveal his heart to us, Ezekiel 33 verse 11 reveals God's heart to us, his heart towards those who reject him and reject a relationship with him. Ezekiel 33 verse 11, God says, I have no pleasure in the death of the wicked, but that the wicked would turn from their ways and live. Turn back from your evil ways. For why will you die? See, God takes no pleasure in this. He does not take joy in the death of anyone. I mean, he actually says that. He says, I have no pleasure in the death of anyone. God doesn't want people to go to hell. He doesn't take delight in people to go into hell. Instead, he wants to have a relationship. He wants them to turn from their sins and to live. God does not take delight, and he doesn't take delight in people going to hell. He wants to have a relationship with us, to turn, repent of our sins, and to live. Number 7, what about people who've never heard of God before? All right, what about people who never heard of God before? Well, we covered this actually a few weeks ago when we talked about Romans 1. In Romans 1, we learned that everybody has chances to know who God is by looking at God's creation, by observing God's fine-tuned creation. When we observe God's fine-tuned creation, it points to us that there's an intelligent designer. It points to us that there's a creator. Now, even God's moral law that's inside us, the moral conscience that's inside us, telling us the difference between what's right and what's wrong, is pointing out to us, it's pointing us to the very God who is going to one day hold us accountable for the things that we are doing in life. And so everybody has an opportunity to at least have some working knowledge that God exists, which is what makes missions both locally and globally in our missional living so critical. It's because God is sending us out into the world to tell people about who he is, to tell people the gospel, to tell people that Jesus is the very God that is stirring in their hearts. Jesus even says in Matthew 28, verses 19 to 20, go therefore and make disciples of all nations. Jesus is sending us out to tell all people, all nations, including people living in Orlando, our friends and our family members, that he is the very God who has been stirring in their hearts. He's sending us out to share that good news with people. Last question, number 8. Why doesn't God do something about it? Why doesn't God do something about it? I mean, if somebody is headed for hell, why doesn't God do something to stop it? Why doesn't God do anything about it? He did, and we nailed him to the cross. He did do something about it, and we crucified him. And Jesus didn't just come to warn us about hell. He came to save us from hell. And we nailed him to a cross. C.S. Lewis, he put it like this. He said, to those who object to the doctrine of hell, what are you asking God to do? To wipe out their past sins and at all costs give them a fresh start? He did that when Jesus died on the cross. You want God to forgive them, but they don't ask for forgiveness. You want God to leave them alone. That's what hell is. Look, there's only 2 kinds of people in the end. Those who say to God, thy will be done, God's will be done, and those to whom God says in the end, thy will be done, your will be done. All that are in hell, choose it. Jesus came to give us a way out. And if we choose not to take his way out, that isn't on God, it's on us. He desires to have a relationship with us, but he won't force us to have a relationship with him. He desires to have a relationship with you, but he won't force you to have a relationship with him. And so the bad news is not everybody will be saved. But the good news is, the great news is that anybody can be saved through faith in Jesus Christ. Psalm 51 verse 17 states this, a broken and contrite heart, O God, you will not despise. A broken and contrite heart, O God, you will not despise. God will never turn down a broken and contrite heart, a person who repents of their sins and desires to turn to him to have a relationship with him. Is that you? Is that you? Some of you who are listening here today, has God been stirring in your heart? Maybe the past few months, past few weeks, maybe in this message. Has God been stirring in your heart to the place to where you say, man, I want to repent of my sins and I want to have a relationship with you, God? If that's you, then click the I commit my life to Jesus button in the chat box, or send us an email at info@cityawakening.org, and we'd love to talk with you more about that. It doesn't matter who you are or what you've done or how disobedient you've been in the past. Remember, the relationship God offered first before he offered the rules, and he's willing to offer you that relationship today too. Will you accept his invitation? For those of you who already have a relationship with Jesus, man, look for the God stirrings that are in your friends' hearts, and look for opportunities for you to tell them about Jesus, that Jesus is the God that is stirring in their hearts, that Jesus is the God who wants to have a relationship with them. But also take some time, maybe even take some time today after this message, to just pause and give God praise, give Jesus praise for giving you the eternal security of your relationship with him because of what he did for you on the cross. And give him praise today for pursuing you and dying for you on the cross before he ever even gave you some laws to follow and rules to follow. City Awakening, let us praise Jesus. Let us pursue a deeper relationship with Jesus. And let us express our love to Jesus by obediently following him.
I was just thinking recently about this idea of hope and this idea that we need to be filled with God's hope, his love. We're so empty sometimes, and we seek that from other things. We seek that from man, but man is going to let us down. Our families might let us down. The church even might let us down sometimes, but God is never going to let us down. He's a God who seeks us, and he fills us with his very spirit. This song we're going to sing together today, we want to invite you to sing it with us. It's called Reckless Love. Before I spoke a word, you were singing over me. And you have been so, so good to me. Before I took a breath, you breathed your life in me. You have been so, so good to me. Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. Oh, it chases me down, finds till I'm found, leaves the 99. And I couldn't earn it, and I don't deserve it. Still you give yourself away. Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. When I was your foe, still your love fought for me. You have been so, so good to me. When I felt no worth, you paid it all for me. And you have been so, so kind to me. Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. Oh, it chases me down, finds till I'm found, leaves the 99. And I couldn't earn it, and I don't deserve it. Still you give yourself away. Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. There's no shadow you won't light up, mountain you won't climb up, coming after me. There's no wall you won't kick down, lie you won't tear down, coming after me. me. There's no shadow you won't light up, mountain you won't climb up, coming after me. There's no wall you won't kick down, lie you won't tear down, coming after me. There's no shadow you won't light up, mountain you won't climb up, coming after me. There's no wall you won't kick down, lie you won't tear down, coming after me. There's no shadow you won't light up, mountain you won't climb up, coming after me. There's no wall you won't kick down, lie you won't tear down, coming after me. Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. Oh, it chases me down, fights till I'm found, leaves the 99. I couldn't earn it, and I don't deserve it, still you give yourself away. Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. Yeah.
Hey, thanks again for being here with us this morning. We hope that you are both encouraged as well as challenged by the message today. We know that these are tough topics that we're addressing during our Starting Point series. And for that reason, we want to continue to encourage you to engage in one of our online small groups throughout the week. They're great follow-up opportunities for questions and conversations regarding these things that we're covering on Sunday morning. So if you want more information about how to get plugged into a group, you can find a link there in the chat box as well as up at the top of the page. And we'll be happy to follow up with you and get you plugged into one of those groups. Also, I want to encourage you to consider partnering with us by giving. Your generosity fuels our mission here at City Awakening and enables us to continue to reach people and serve our city and spread the gospel with those who are desperately looking for hope in their hurting world. And then lastly, moms, we haven't forgotten about you, of course. We said earlier that we're going to have a special giveaway surprise. And so in the chat box at the bottom there, you're going to see a link pop up that you can click for any mom. And we're going to be sending you a $10 gift card for you to use on yourself. Don't use it on the kids or your husband, but on yourself. It's not much, but just a way of us showing as a church that we honor moms. We're thankful for the sacrifices that you make on behalf of your family and those around you. And so we just want to show you that appreciation this morning. We hope you have a great Sunday and a great week ahead, and we look forward to seeing you back next week. Thanks.